AAA games in 2025 push GPUs harder than ever, especially at 4K, and we can expect more of the same in 2026. So does FSR4's improved image quality justify the performance cost compared to FSR3? Let's find out. So as we see here in this chart, again, rasterization only, so no ray tracing or upscaling of any sort. We can see quite a rough bit of numbers. We're trying to hit 60 FPS, and we can see that at max settings and high settings, none of our games except for one, but none of our games really was able to hit 60 FPS at all, except one. Cyberpunk 2077 at high settings gave us 81 FPS average and 59 FPS for the 1% lows. I mean, that's a great showing here again with just high settings and no ray tracing. The 7900 XTX gave us well over 60 FPS, more than playable. All right, so if none of these games, well, none of these games at max settings could get us to 60, and only one game could get us above 60 FPS when using high, how will FSR3 and the int8 version of FSR4 perform? The int8 version of FSR4 is understood to be more demanding than FSR3 on RDNA 3 cards, but I didn't expect it to be this demanding on my 7900 XTX. Is it even still worth the effort? The first game we're going to take a look at here is a 2024 release Black Myth Wukong. Again, max settings 4K here. So when implementing FSR3 into the game, we had to go to FSR3 balanced before we were able to crack 60 FPS average. At FSR3 balanced, we got 63 FPS average and 52 FPS for the 1% lows. However, with FSR4, we're seeing anywhere between an 8 to 11, maybe 12% performance loss as compared to FSR3. With the int8 version of FSR4, we had to go all the way to FSR4 performance to crack 60 FPS average, getting us 62 FPS average and 51 FPS for the 1% lows. All right, so we had to use more aggressive upscaling with the int8 version of FSR4 performance to get more than 60 FPS average as compared to FSR3. But that's not the end of the story. It's not as simple as just saying, well, I'll just go with FSR3 since it gets me higher FPS. Because if we take a look at here the side-by-side comparisons of FSR3 balanced versus FSR4 performance, int8 version of FSR4 performance, we can see here in Black Myth Wukong that there are some graphical issues with FSR3. FSR3, we can see some shimmering and noise issues in the main character's hair on his head. We can also see some issues in the foliage and the way other shadows are implemented when it comes to FSR3 balanced. So even though we're going with a more aggressive upscale using the int8 FSR4 performance to get the same FPS, we are seeing a significant boost in visual quality and visual fidelity. So in my opinion, with Black Myth Wukong, the int8 version of FSR4 is preferred over FSR3. Clear Obscure Expedition 33 received the FSR3 support, I believe in an update that was released in December of 2025. Now, with that implementation of FSR3 into the game, I don't think it's very good. But first, let's take a look at the numbers. So it didn't take too much to hit 60 plus FPS average here with Expedition 33. We could use FSR3 quality to get us to a nice 69 FPS average and 56 FPS for the 1% lows. As compared with the int8 version of FSR4, we had to go to FSR4 balanced to get a 64 FPS average and 53 FPS for the 1% lows. So we're cracking 60 FPS there. There is a massive performance loss again here, when compared from FSR3 to FSR4, we're looking anywhere between 16 to almost 20% FPS loss between FSR3 and the int8 version of FSR4 running on the 7900 XTX. But again, it's not as straight cut as that. You can't just say, I'll just go with FSR3, it gives me the higher numbers. I mean, you can, but if you care about visual fidelity, let's take a look at that. And here we can see that Expedition 33's FSR3 implementation is, in my opinion, rushed and bad. The int8 version of FSR4 balanced is significantly better visually. Much of the shimmering and speckled lighting is missing from the doorway there that we saw, as well as the grass just looks more clear and sharp and less noisy, including Gustav's hair, which seems much, much browner and nicer with the int8 version of FSR4 balanced. So again, even though FSR3 quality got us above 60 FPS, I don't think it's a fair trade-off. FSR3's implementation in this game is pretty bad in my opinion, and I would rather go with the int8 version of FSR4 balanced in this game and get a better visual quality. Alright, so looking at the black sheep of the family here, so Borderlands 4 at max settings in 4K, using FSR3 performance, we were finally able to crack 60 FPS, getting 61 FPS average and 52 FPS average for the 1% lows. With FSR4 quality, we were not able to hit 60 FPS and really not even close. The int8 version of FSR4, I guess too demanding with this game somehow. We were losing anywhere between 10 to 20% performance as compared to FSR3. So with already the bad demanding performance of Borderlands 4 and the overhead from the int8 version of FSR4, we could not hit 60 FPS on average. So what did I need to do to get to 60 FPS or more? In this chart, you can see that the way we hit 60 plus FPS with int8 FSR4 was to go down to the high setting and using FSR4 balanced for the upscaling. Doing so got us 68 FPS average finally and 59 FPS for the 1% lows. But how do the two upscaling methods compare in Borderlands 4? As you can see in this side-by-side, FSR3 performance actually displays a little bit of a graphical issue. Now again, the art style of Borderlands 4 really does hide a lot of the graphical issues that FSR3 typically brings, especially at the performance mode of upscaling. But we can still see a little bit of an issue here in the scope of the gun, the glass in the scope of the gun. You can see some flickering, some shimmering, some issues there in that glass. Now, that's also present in the int8 version of FSR4 running balanced on high settings, but it's significantly reduced. We can also see that when looking at the grass and the way it's being rendered with FSR3 performance, at least to my eyes, it doesn't look as sharp, looks a little sizzly, grainy. Some issues especially when the grass is moving or when your character is moving, it really shows up then, whereas FSR4 or the int8 version of FSR4 with balanced upscaling looks significantly more stable. Alright, so maybe on to a not so bad showing of an Unreal Engine 5 game, although The Outer Worlds 2 brings in a close second to being one of the worst performers with a UE5 game, just second to only to the Borderlands 4. So looking at the game here, we can see that at max settings 4K, The Outer Worlds 2 and the 7900 XTX were able to give us over 60 FPS average at FSR3 performance, delivering 70 FPS for the average and 57 FPS for the 1% lows. With FSR4, again, quite a bit of a significant reduction in performance. We're losing anywhere between 8 to maybe 13% loss in performance here as compared to FSR3. However, as with FSR3, we used FSR4 performance to break 60 FPS. Just barely. We got 61 FPS average and 52 FPS for the 1% lows with int8 FSR4 performance. And again, I think it can be quite clear here that FSR4 easily outperforms FSR3 when it comes to graphical fidelity. FSR4 performance shows much sharper image, much more stable image, a lot less shimmer. With FSR3 performance, we're noticing shimmering and issues with the lights around the structures, and we're even noticing shimmering, a lot of shimmering with the lights, I guess the glowing plants in the background there. Quite a significant graphical degradation with FSR3 performance upscaling, whereas the int8 version of FSR4 performance, that one holds up much better graphically when upscaling. And finally, we'll take a look at one of the better performing games, the 2020 release of Cyberpunk 2077. Again, using 4K and max settings, so at the ultra settings. And we see here that with FSR3 quality, we easily crack 60 FPS already, getting 83 FPS for the average and 59 FPS for the 1% lows. Quite a significant loss in performance. When it comes to the int8 version of FSR4, we're losing about 13 to maybe 11 or 12% in performance when compared to FSR3. However, with the int8 version of FSR4 quality, we are still able to achieve more than 60 FPS on average, giving us 72 FPS for the averages and 52 FPS for the 1% low. However, what about graphical issues? You can see with FSR3 quality, we've got a lot of shimmering, both with the windows in the buildings as well as the holographic lights around the streets, and even issues with like the tail lights of vehicles and things like that. A lot of shimmer. The int8 FSR4 quality easily trounces the FSR3 version. So I think this one is an easy call. I would definitely go with the int8 version of FSR4 quality again. So looking at the results results of the upscaling benchmarks with these 5 games, we can see that FSR3 performs better when it comes to higher FPS, or giving us higher FPS than the int8 version of FSR4. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the int8 version of FSR4 does take a surprising toll on the performance of the 7900 XTX. With all 3 upscaling methods, we saw a significant loss in performance compared to FSR3 when using FSR4. FSR3 quality was about 11% faster than the int8 version of FSR4 quality. FSR3 balanced was about 14 or so percent faster than the FSR4 balanced, and FSR3 performance was about 15% on average faster than the int8 version of FSR4. And again, these are averages, so the individual titles that we tested here today, a couple of them did show significantly higher differences. I think 2 games were actually about 19% slower in some of the upscaling methods. So it does come down to the question of which are you after, higher FPS or a better upscaling image? I know for me, with the 7900 XTX and playing at 4K, I'm going to err on the side of a better image quality, while the int8 version of FSR4 isn't as performant as FSR3 when it comes to graphical quality or graphical fidelity. It was significantly and notably better in all 5 games. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe. If you have any comments, please feel free to put them down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. This is Mr. MCP76 signing out.